Hey, Christina.
Well, hello. Welcome to Percent Rent Training.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here,
Well, I'm happy to have you.
even if it is just for a few minutes.
Hey, better than nothing.
That's right. See, Kelly and Reagan are on now. Yay! Hi, ladies.
Hi.
Hello.
I just wanted to join real quick because I wanted to make sure you guys got my note yesterday about the
About the
percent
percentage
rent.
rent?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Sorry.
It's okay. I mean, it's unfortunate, but
Yeah. The only thing, Christina, I was thinking this too. In the shower this morning, I was thinking about this. I don't know why, but that's what I was thinking about. I should really think about better things than percent rent in the shower. But cumulative, is that enhanced?
It is, but the problem with that, which this is
Is it the
specific,
same?
yeah, this is specific to the scenario that you had sent me
Yeah,
before, what they're needing is comparing basically like the monthly percent rent amount against the annual percent rent amount. And the
right.
comparison that we have within AMT, it compares the percent rent amount against a different kind of charge, whether that's base rent or guarantee or
Cam,
something like that.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can't
Okay.
compare percent rent to percent rent, basically.
It was an idea that I
when
had.
y'all were reading through that, am I interpreting it the right way? Like to where we would be taking the monthly and then at the end of the year, we would take it as a yearly? Like, does that sound like what are we doing what I guess the lease says?
As far as I can tell, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But I
I
will say I've
have been
never seen that before.
right. That's why I'm like, I've asked everybody who's ever thought about percent rent how to do that.
So is it normally just they do the monthly and that's it?
Yeah.
So, okay, so for us, I guess a store that would just do the monthly, what happens when they don't hit the break even? Do they get a credit or is it just a zero?
I think it's just a zero, right, Christina?
Yeah, your report would just say percent rent due $0, and then you'd likely pay your base rent or something else instead.
Okay. Because I think that's the way that if we do it in the annual, it kind of helps us because when you look at it at an annual, it doesn't take you quite as high. I don't think that we would be paying the same amount. But like I said,
As a good thing for you or a good thing for your landlord?
well, I think it's a good thing for us.
Okay, well, then we'll do it that way.
Right. Like I said, I think the leases that we have, they're like that. Either we don't pay them at all because we never hit it, or we pay them every month. So it doesn't really make a difference.
Right.
But we can just make a note to where those we just have to reconcile outside of the system.
Well, the system can, if it's an annual, you can set it to bill when breakpoint reached. So then whenever you do hit it, you will have it pop up as something that you do owe.
On a monthly basis.
No, just whenever you hit it. Right, Christina?
Yeah, like if you this will make more sense when we get to the scenario setup, but if you have that box checked, then basically once you hit your break point, you'll start paying it. And then it starts looking at it monthly at that point. And so every month, if you hit that break point, it'll bill you for it. And if not, then it'll just be a $0 amount and you'll pay whenever it says you owe.
I don't think that will work though, because we wouldn't be paying the beginning months, even though we need to, because it's on a monthly, right?
Well, if you don't hit it in the month, then you don't have to pay it. If you don't hit whatever the breakout to the month amount is, then you don't have to pay it.
Yeah. I didn't completely follow the example.
Well, like she said, it'll probably be, a light bulb, I'm sure, will go off when it gets to the scenario.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to talk abstractly about percent rent, right?
Yeah.
But Heather, one thing about that scenario that I just thought about is if their billing cycle is still set to annual, the calculations are going to be using the annual breakpoint amount. So I don't think the odds of them hitting that during a month prior to the 12th period is probably slim.
Well, we hope they hit it. I mean, because they're making bang, right? They're making a lot of bucks. But
We do and we don't.
right, because you don't want to. You want to because you want to be making that kind of money, but you don't want to because then you have to pay more. Yes, that
Right.
is the double-edged sword of percent rent. Yeah. Okay.
That's fine. We'll just keep going with
Yeah.
the original.
And if it
rent
ends
and-
up being goofy, Christina will let me know, and we can shift gears if we need to.
Okay.
If you work it, when you get to that scenario. But okay, I just wanted to be on here real quick just so we could walk through that a little bit. I don't think I helped any, but you are in really good hands with Christina.
Well, thanks for joining, Heather.
Yep. You guys enjoy your training.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, let me share my screen. That would be helpful. Okay, you should see the AMT dashboard. Do you see it all right?
Uh-huh.
All right, good deal. Well, before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. First off, you might notice that I'm in the AMT Direct Academy database. And I am going to use that for our training today just because I wanted to be able to show you how to import sales and post batches and things like that. So I didn't want to mess up your current live data in prod. So using the Academy database, but all the screens will look the same. It's all the same functionality. It's just we're using test data instead of your real data. Also, I am going to record our training, so if you zone out along the way, don't feel bad. I'll be sure to send you the recording later. And then another little bit of hopefully encouragement is I by no means anticipate this taking the full 2 hours, but I did go ahead and schedule it for that amount of time just in case we did need it to work through, you know, some of those weird scenarios or whatnot. But hopefully we should be able to finish a little bit early.
Okay.
And then as usual, if you've got any questions along the way, do not hesitate to stop me. I don't mind at all.
Okay.
All right, so percent rent. This module is a little heavier on the setup up front, only because the way it works is any lease that you have percent rent that you owe for, you do have to set up a percent rent scenario for each of them. So each lease will have their own, you know, special scenario stating your sales type and your breakpoints and all of that. But once you set that up initially in the beginning, you know, from that point forward, you're really just maintaining the scenarios. And then you would go into the module every month and process and post to see what you owe. And then that would generate your percent rent invoices within AP. So you could just go in and pay them and be on your way. So it is a little heavier up front, but hopefully that effort will make your life easier down the road. Now, before you can go into your leases and set up your scenarios and things like that, you do have to do a little bit of administrative setup first. So if we go to My Account and Master Fields Management here, there's a couple things that we need to look at and set up for percent rent. Oh, I might have been logged in too long. Let me just refresh. What in the world? I've been in here all day and not had a single problem. And the moment I go to show you something, it slows down. Well, I'll give it just a second, and if it doesn't load, then I'll just close out and open up a new browser. Make sure it's not my internet. I'm going to go to something else. Nope, that worked. Well, I was able to pull it up in Internet Explorer. So let me, 1 second. I'm going to do a little task manager here. And in task. And try again. Are you guys in there by chance? Is it just my computer?
No, I'm not. I can see if I can get in though.
Yeah. I mean, while Heather was talking, I was in there doing stuff and it was working fine, so.
I can pull up just the AMT direct. Yeah, I can pull that up fine.
I can as well.
Well, what on earth? Thank you for checking. Okay, so UAT works. Well, while we wait on that, I'll at least open UAT. In worst case scenario, I can set up a lease really fast in there. Good thing I scheduled this for 2 hours, right? Oh, is this? Sorry, I'm just setting up a lease so that way we have something to use in a second when we go to set this up.
Is there a preferred browser for AMT or does it matter if we use like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer?
It used to be they were, pretty set on internet. Now it's kind of open to whatever your preference is. I know some people use Edge a lot. I just like Chrome better.
Yeah, I do too. But I know we have some things here that don't work as well on Google Chrome, so.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about this. I promise I had all this set up in the other database before it died on me.
That's okay.
Okay, last thing, and then I'll be done. right. Well, it doesn't look like production's going to load, but that's okay. We can use UAT just as easily. All right, so sorry for the delay, but like I was saying, a little bit of administrative setup will be done under My Account and Master Fields Management. And the first thing, my life is a disaster. This is tragic. Okay. We will come back here to do the percent rent setup, but I am going to have to log into another database so I can show this piece of it. We'll get there. All right. All right, I know this one will work. So back to Master Fields Management. Okay, so the first thing that I want to look at here, I'm going to filter the default field name column for charge. And that's going to bring up all the field names that contain charge within the name. And the one that I'm looking for here is charge type. Now you might see several if you have different contract types in your database, so just be sure that you're setting this up for the appropriate contract types. But either way, once you find the charge type field, over on the right you'll see your codes button. And when I click that, it's bringing up the manage codes pop-up. So this here is giving me a list of all the possible charges that I have currently set up in my database. So this is where you find your base rents, your CAM, insurance, tax, utilities, all those different charges that you see. So what we need to do here is we need to set up charges specific to percent rent. Now you can call these whatever you want. I have one here labeled PCT, percent rent. You might want to label one, PCT in lieu if you're paying it, in place of your base rent. Whatever you want to call them is fine. But these charges here are what's going to represent that percent rent amount that you're owing. So once you go in and process, if the system says that you owe percent rent for that lease, this is the charge it's going to apply it to. So you would see this on your lease in the recurring payments widget, and this will also be the charge that you see it reflected on your invoices within AP Manager. So whatever makes sense to you as to how you want that percent rent represented, you're going to add those charges here. So like I said, I've got one currently called percent rent, but if I wanted, a second charge, I'll click add new. And the first thing I enter is the code, which is basically just an acronym for the charge type. So I'll say PCTIL for in lieu. And then your description is just the elaborated version of that. So percent rent in lieu. And then your index ID, you don't have to select this. It's not a required field, but if your documents are indexed and you want to be able to quickly search by the percent rent charges, then you could choose your percent rent ID here down at the bottom, or you could just leave it blank. It doesn't, it's not required. But what is very important is this CAT code field here, because the CAT code is what's facilitating this charge being used in other modules or being used within percent rent. So for any of your percent rent charges, you want to be sure that they have a CAT code of PCT, because you'll see in just a minute when we go do our scenario setup on the lease, any charge that does not have a CAT code of PCT will not be available for us to select. So by choosing the CAT code of PCT here, that's what's going to open it up and allow me to apply it to my scenario at the lease level. And then once you've got all your information in here, you can click the check to save or the X to cancel. And there's our new charge. And your system probably comes standard with this 1% rent charge here, but I do recommend having probably 2 to 3 at least. I mean, you can have as many percent rent charges set up as you'd like, but at a minimum, I would say probably 2 to 3, only because each scenario that you set up on, each scenario per lease that you set up has to have its own percent rent charge. So in the case that you did have, let's say a lease with 2 stores and each of those stores has their own percent rent scenario, then each of those stores is going to need their own separate PCT charge. So that's why I recommend setting a couple up just in case you run into any situations like that where you may need multiple. So that was under charge type. Here in Master Fields Management, we just click the codes button. And then also from within this screen, I'm going to come back up to my filter and filter by PCT. And that is going to bring up a list of all the different PCT fields in the system. All right, so the next one we want to look at is the PCT sales category here, and I'm going to go right back to clicking the codes button. And here's all the current categories that I have set up in this database, that I could be importing sales for my scenarios. Now, there's not very many in this database, but my other ones have a lot more. But any sales type that you're going to be importing and considering for your scenarios to pay percent rent on, you would need to add that here, whether it's gross sales, net sales, jewelry, concessions, clothing, whatever it may be. Any type of sales that you may have, you would want to enter it here. So by entering it here, it'll become available on our scenario setup at the lease level in a minute, meaning we could apply our percent rent scenario to this particular sales type. So if you needed to add some new ones, you'll click Add New here. And just like we did a second ago, you can enter your code and then the description, and then Update is in the bottom right corner. Okay. And then your other PCT fields here, the interim report, notice annual, notice, and then your sales type down here. These are various other drop downs on the scenario setup screen. So once we go to our lease in a second and we click our Add New Percent Rent Scenario, I'll be sure to point out each of these fields, which are drop downs. And here is where you would come to control what options you see within those drop downs. Now, each of these has a standard set of options already, but if you ever needed to add to those, maybe you needed something different, then here's where you would come to change them. You would just find the appropriate field, click the codes button, and add a new field or add a new row like we did in the last two pop-ups. So I'll be sure to point all those out to you, but just keep in mind this screen here is where you would come to make those adjustments. All right, so let me log back in. And just for fun, I'm going to try production again. Oops, K Miller 1. So that is really all of the administrative setup that you have to do. So it's very minimal as far as the admin side, but you do have to set up percent rent on each of your leases. So let me open up my lease that I just created. And this lease here, it's real standard. It's a common real estate lease starting in January of 2020, going through December of 2026. So it's a standard calendar year. I went ahead and linked a space here. I did link my landlord payment contact. So that's who I would probably pay my base rent or my CAM or any other charges to. But what's important for your leases that have percent rent is you want to be sure to link a percent rent specific contact because that's going to be the person who receives your sales letters should you decide to distribute those out through scheduling and distribution. So I'm going to click link contact here, and we'll just use Heather as my my other contact. So I'm going to search for her. There she is. And then I need to choose my contact type. And naturally, I don't have one in this database. Oh, goodness. Okay, but what you would have is you would have a contract type, or I'm sorry, contact type called like landlord percent rent or something of that nature. You could label it whatever you would want to call it, but it would be specific to percent rent. And then you could apply it to this person here. I just chose landlord notice because I don't have a percent rent one. And click link. And then that's going to add her to our lease back here in the contact section. So then we would have that percent rent contact available now. So by linking her to my lease here as a percent rent contact, then once I set up and or distribute my sales letters to report on my sales, it's going to pick up Heather to this specific lease because it recognizes her as my percent rent contact. So it's going to send her my sales numbers for this particular lease and any scenarios on it. All right, then just to show you, I created a monthly base rent charge. It's a standard January through December, $5,000 a month, so pretty standard there. And then going to come down here to our percent rent widget, and now we can actually set up our scenario. So I'm going to click Add New, and that will give us our scenario setup screen. And so here's where you're really defining all the details about your different scenarios per each lease. So you'll fill out this screen for any of your leases that have percent rent. And the first thing you want to look at up top here is just this kind of informational section. It's just reminding you what lease, what location you're adding this scenario to. So here's my lease name, here's my space number, and this little drop down here is going to have any spaces that you have linked to the lease. So if you did have a lease that has multiple spaces, it's going to default to the first one. So if you need to add this scenario to any other type of space, just be sure you're selecting it from this drop down here, because once you save, it will not let you change the field, or change the space. You would have to delete it and then just re-add it. So choose your space from the drop down. And then your start and end dates over on the right here are going to correspond with whatever space you selected in the drop down. So this is my space start and end date. All righty, once you've confirmed all that information and it looks good, then you can work your way down to the top section and start filling out some of this information. The first field we have here, sales department. When I click this drop down, here's all those different sales departments that we were looking at in Master Fields Management. Now keep in mind, we were in a different database, so we've got a couple new ones now, but I've got a clothing sales department, employee discounts, gross sales, textbooks. Here's all the potential types of sales that I could import into AMT. So now I just need to choose whichever one it is that this lease is basing percent rent off of. So I'm going to go with gross sales here. And then underneath that, process percent rent. This is probably the most critical field, I would say, because here's where you're telling the system, do I actually want to process the scenario to see what I owe and generate those invoices, or is it just for informational purposes? So if you do want to process and get your percent rent amount, you'll want to be sure to set this to yes, which 9 times out of 10, that's probably going to be the case, but an example of an instance when you might have process percent rent set to no is if maybe you had an amendment to your lease that says you no longer have to pay percent rent, but you've been processing year over year and you don't want to lose that historical data. So you could just switch this to say process percent rent no, so then you're no longer having to pay it, but you still have this information here to refer back to, and you can still look at the sales over the years if you needed to.
We have some leases where we don't have to calculate a payment, but we have to submit the sales.
Okay.
Still, would that be different than this process here?
Yes, it is slightly different, but you're not far off. So in that case, when you just want to report on the sales, you would still set process percent rent to yes. And then in calculation method down below, you would want to select report only.
Okay. Okay.
So just to explain, the reason why you would want to do that instead of just saying percent rent no is because Report Builder only picks up sales for scenarios that have process percent rent set to yes. So if you set it to no, it's not going to register as picking up the sales here. So just set it to yes, and then a calculation method of report only.
Okay.
All right, so depending on whether you have process set to yes or no, that's going to control which of the remaining fields are required. So since we set it to yes, pretty much everything else in this first column is going to be required, meaning I need to fill it out. And our next field, calculation method, is where we're telling the system how it is that percent rent should be calculated for this particular scenario. So we already talked about report only, which means you'd just be reporting on the sales and not actually calculating anything. in lieu is going to be used if you're paying percent rent in place of base rent or your other, maybe a guaranteed charge of some sort. Stated would be used if you have a straightforward stated breakpoint in your lease. Like, we're going to pay 6% of any sales over $0. And stated could also be used if you had a tiered breakpoint. So like, you're paying 6% of anything over $1 million, and then you're going to pay 10% of anything over $2 million, and so on and so forth, kind of up the scale there. So if you had a tiered breakpoint, stated would also apply. The natural calculation method is going to be used if you have a natural breakpoint, if your lease states that you have a natural breakpoint. So one that's going to be based off of a certain charge type, typically base rent. And once you selected natural here, it would give you some new fields down below to kind of establish that breakpoint. And we'll look at that in just a bit. And then greater of base rent or percent rent. For this one, this is kind of a two-part system here. So if you use greater of base rent or percent rent, then every month you would go into AP Manager and pay your base rent up front as you typically would. And then once you get your sales numbers in for the month, you can go and process percent rent and see what you would owe based off of percentage rent. And then it's going to take the greater of those two, and that's what you would owe. So if base rent was greater, then you're done. You already paid that, you're good to go. Or if percent rent was greater, then it's going to look at what you already paid for base rent and subtract that out, and then you'll pay the remaining difference there. So greater of BRT or PCT, you're just paying the higher of the two. And then lesser of BRT or PCT is the same concept, but opposite end of the spectrum. So you would just be paying the lesser value of either your base rent or the percent rent. So we'll go with stated here. The next field we have is billing cycle. So this is, how frequent are we paying percent rent? How often do we want to process and actually make these payments? Is it annually, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual? What's my cycle? Another way to think about this is, what span of sales is it that we're considering for these calculations? So am I using my January through December sales to calculate percent rent, in which case you'd have an annual cycle? Or maybe you're basing it on your quarterly sales. But it's basically the duration or the period in which you're considering sales, and when does that cycle start over. So it sounded like the ones we talked about earlier would be annual cycles. But since this lease starts in January of 2020, I'm just going to do semi-annual because I can't quite get a full year in there yet. And then underneath that, billing charge type here is where we see those percent rent charges that we would have set up in master fields management. So here's our PCT. If we were in the other database, we'd see that percent rent in lieu charge that we set up. But here's where you're deciding what charge you want to represent any percent rent amounts that you may owe for this lease. So just keep in mind that whatever charge you select here, once you save that scenario, then back here on our lease, in our recurring payments and receivables, we'll have a new row here for that percent rent charge. So if we chose the first one here, PCT, then we'd have a new PCT charge in that widget.
What would estimate be used for?
So that one, some people use their estimated sales to calculate percent rent instead of their actual sales. And so I think that they would use that charge to represent, like, here's what we think we would owe in percent rent for this year.
Okay. Okay.
Now, one other thing about the billing charge type here is, if I go back to my base rent charge, and we look at the charge type dropdown, there's a whole lot of other charges available here besides just those percent rent, those 2% rent charges. So the reason that all of these are not showing up as available in this dropdown is because these are the only two that had that cat code of PCT. So now they're the only two that I can choose from here for my scenario. So if you did need additional charges, aside from these two that we already have, that's when you'd go back to Master Fields Management to charge type and add new, and then add whatever charge you may need. So we'll go with PCT here, and it's gonna ask me, do you wanna set up a new percent rent recurring charge? Yes, I do, because that's what's gonna generate that new charge in my RPR widget. And then under that prior year end and current year end period, here's where you're here's where you're defining whatever cycle you chose up here. So what is, the start and end period of my semi-annual or of my annual cycle? And when you're entering these fields, it can be a little misleading. So it might be better for you to think of these as prior period and current period and kind of leave out the year end piece, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a full year here. It's dependent on whatever billing cycle you chose up above. But what these two fields are, your prior period would be the last period in which you processed, or in our case here, this is a new lease. We haven't processed percent rent yet. So my prior period would be the period prior to my lease begin date. So in our case, 12 of 2019. And then current year end period or current period is what's the end of my current cycle. So I said I had a semi-annual cycle. I'm running on a typical calendar year. So my current semi-annual end period would be 6 of 2020. So I'm going to enter 6 of 2020 here. And so now I've established, all right, my semi-annual cycle is based on January through June and then July through December. So after June, my cycle is going to kick back off and start over, and then I'm going to consider the next 6 months of sales instead of the prior 6. Now let's just say, for an example, let's say we chose an annual cycle here. Then my prior year end, in our case, is still going to be 2019 because we haven't processed yet. But now my current year end would be 12 of 2020 because that's the end of my current year that I'm trying to process percent rent for. So these will always correlate with whatever your billing cycle is. So let me change mine back. And just so you know, the only reason I'm doing semi-annual and ending on 6/20 is so that way I can do a full cycle and import all the sales for it so you can see what that would look like. Okay, so underneath our prior and current year end, we've got prorate breakpoint. So this would be used if you had a stub year. So if you have a stub year, does your lease say that you need to prorate the breakpoint so that way you're more likely to hit it instead of using the full annual amount? And if so, then you could select yes here. If you leave it set to no, then it's just going to do your calculations based on the annual breakpoint amount that you entered down here in this section. Partial year included, this is kind of similar. Again, if you had a stub year, do you want to wait to pay that with your next full year? So you're going to wait until your next full year and then lump in that stub year with it. If so, partial year included would be set to yes. If you leave it set to no, then that's like saying we're going to go ahead and pay off that stub year and then we'll start fresh next year with a full cycle. And then bill when breakpoint reached. This is what Heather and I were discussing earlier. What this does is if we had this set to yes, that's like saying once I hit my breakpoint amount that I have entered down here, I want to go ahead and start paying. I don't want to wait until the end of my cycle and pay it all at once. I want to start paying as soon as I hit that breakpoint. So let's say we have a semi-annual cycle and I hit my breakpoint in period 2. Then I'm going to go ahead and make that payment in period 2, and then it's going to, process period 3. If I hit it again, I'll pay it again. If not, I'll wait and process again in period 4. So bill when breakpoint reached is kind of like I'm going to start paying once I hit that breakpoint, and then it's going to look at it every month after that until the end of my cycle to see if I continue to pay, or maybe I don't hit it until the last period. But if I have bill when breakpoint reached set to no, then you're only paying based on whatever billing cycle you selected above. So in our case, I would only pay one time during the 6th and the 12th periods, or semi-annually. Or if you had an annual cycle, then you'd only pay one time in the 12th period of your cycle. Let's see, I'll set ours to yes, just so we can see what that would look like. And then moving over to the right-hand column, the first field here, calculate using, this one is required. And here's where you're telling the system what type of sales you want to use for your calculations. Now, the reason you have to specify this is because the system will allow you to import different kinds of sales. So maybe I want to report on my estimated sales, but I want to do my calculations on the actual. So you can enter different kinds, but what you're choosing in this field here is which of these types do you want to use for the actual percent rent calculations to determine what you owe. So I'm going to go with actual, but you'll choose what's ever applicable. And then underneath that, interim report due. So this is the report that is due to your landlord. How often do you actually have to provide that? Is it going to be monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual, whatever it may be? And then if you owe that report, within how many days after the end of your cycle close do you have to provide that report to them? And you can make whatever selection here. Now these fields here, the calculate using all the way down to UDF4, or I'm sorry, hold on before I say that. Calculate using, interim report due within, and annual report due within. These are the 4 fields or the 4 drop downs on the scenario that I was talking about that you can customize within Master Fields Management. So when you're choosing your interim report due within, if you needed something different than monthly or quarterly and you wanted to do, I'm just going to say daily as an example, then you could go into Master Fields Management, find the interim report due field, click that codes button, and add whatever additional options you needed here. Same thing with within. If you needed options other than 10, 15, 20, all the way up to 120 days, you could go into Master Fields Management and customize this list. So all of these are found once we searched under the field name for PCT. Okay, now annual report due within is, in addition to the interim report, if you also have to provide a year-end report to the landlord, here's where you're choosing, again, within how many days after the close of your cycle do you have to provide that report. And then the next 4, your UDF or user-defined fields, these are 100% customizable. So you could find these 4 fields in Master Fields Management as well. Search for UDF or percent rent or something. And you could customize these to track any 4 pieces of information that you may want on your scenarios. So if there's something around percent rent that you typically track that you don't have a place for here, then you could use one of those 4 to track that information.
For the annual report, so we do have to submit that sometimes. Would we upload like new, or I guess maybe called it certified sales numbers for that, or will it just kind of do a report of the sales that are already in there at the end of the year?
Yes, it's going to base it off whatever sales you already have entered into the system. Now, if you wanted to provide that report on a different kind of sales, then you could import them and maybe customize that within Report Builder. You'd go in there, find the report you need, and say, use my certified sales instead of actual. But whatever you have uploaded to the scenario, that's what it's going to use for that report.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, all of the fields in this second column here, these are just informational. So, well, aside from calculate using, but all of these here underneath calculate using are just tracking information. So they're not actually impacting your scenario. They're not impacting your calculations or anything like that. It's just if you want to track this information, and some of it will be visible on some of the reports within the module as well. I'll try to point some of that out once we run those. Okay, now, once you've filled out your top section, Then we can move down to our first little blue section, which is the breakpoints. So here's where we're actually establishing what that breakpoint amount is, or what our percentage is that we owe. Now, before I add my own, let's come back up here to the calculation method and say that we had a natural scenario. So once I choose natural, we have this new row here. And here's where I'm kind of setting up or establishing what this natural breakpoint is based off of. So first thing it's asking is which rent type or what charge type is it that this breakpoint is based off of. So I'll choose base rent here. Now this dropdown would list any charges that you have on the lease. I just happen to only have base rent, but you could pick whatever's applicable. And then you could establish your percentage. So my lease says I owe 5%. And then I'll click recalculate and it'll say this will delete any existing breakpoints. Do you want to proceed? Yes, I do. And then it took my annual base rent amount, so back here 60,000, and it divided it by my 5% to give me this new breakpoint total. So it established that breakpoint for me. There's my 5%. The 1.2 million again is based off of the annual base rent amount. And the ACT column means it's active. Now the system generated that breakpoint for me, but let's say, you know, we needed to adjust this for whatever reason. I need it to be 1.25 million instead. Well, I could customize that, but if you want your calculations to pick up whatever adjustment you made here, you want to be sure to check this override box, because if you don't, then the system's going to use whatever natural breakpoint it calculated. So if you use the natural breakpoint and you would make any adjustments to it, just be sure to check override so that way the system picks that up whenever you do your processing and calculations. Now I'm going to switch ours back to stated so we can enter our own breakpoints and delete that. All right, so with our stated scenario, we've got a real cookie cutter, you know, breakpoint here. So I'm going to click add new. And the first thing it's asking me to do is enter an effective date. So this is when does our breakpoint begin, or when does it become effective, so that way, you know, our calculations can be made. Now, typically this is, well, you could set this to match your space start date. So I want mine to be 1/1 of 2020. But really this is just, you know, it needs to be prior to whenever you want to start processing. So yeah, my lease starts in January of 2020, but maybe we're not starting to process percent rent until March. Then maybe I wouldn't set my breakpoint effective date until March 1st of 2020. So the effective date, there's a little flexibility here as far as what you would want it to be, as long as the effective date is prior to whenever you want to start processing and paying percent rent. Now, when the effective date does become important is if you did have a tiered breakpoint like I was talking about, because then you would just want to be sure that, you know, your full range is covered there within the effective dates. And we'll enter one of those in just a second. But let's see, I'm going to do 1/1/2020 here. Then I can enter my percentage, so we'll stick with 5%. And then breakpoint, this field here is where you're entering the actual breakpoint amount. And this is going to be an annual breakpoint amount. So you're entering the annual number here. Even though I set up top, I have a billing cycle of semi-annual. I'm still entering my annual breakpoint amount. And the system's going to figure that out once I process. It's going to look at that breakpoint amount, see that I have a semi-annual billing cycle, and it'll cut it in half. It'll cut my breakpoint in half to accommodate a semi-annual cycle. So just be.
Is that the case for any billing cycle we pick? We always put an annual breakpoint there?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so I'm going to leave mine at 0. So we'll do a tiered breakpoint. And then the ACT is an active column. So if you did have multiple breakpoints, like, you know, maybe I had a second row that starts January of 2021 because next year my breakpoint increases, then the column ACT, it's going to say yes next to whichever breakpoint is currently active and that is currently being used to do your calculations. So this one would say yes, and then my 2021 row would say no. So it's going to be based on whatever effective date is over here on the left. But let's click Add New. So let's say we have a tiered breakpoint, which means my effective dates need to match. And so now we're going to pay 7% of anything over 2 million. So too many zeros. There we go. All right, so here would be my tiered breakpoint. I'm going to pay 5% of anything, and then anything over 2 million, I'll pay 7%. And then underneath that, you've got your exclusions. So things that we want to exclude from our calculations, or sales numbers that we want to exclude. And when it comes to the exclusions, you have basically two options here as to how you could do these. Now you may decide to enter your gross sales like I chose up here. That kind of encompasses everything. And so then you could manually add your exclusions down here below to say, okay, now out of those gross sales, we want to exclude any employee sales. So you could add those here, check apply to calculations, and then it'll exclude those numbers. Option 2 would be maybe you chose or you're importing net sales that already takes out all of those things, and you're really just using the raw numbers here. Then you either wouldn't have to apply or wouldn't have to enter your exclusions underneath, or you could just enter them here to show it, for informational purposes, and then you just wouldn't check apply to calculations. So you'd essentially just be tracking it, for information here. But let's say we did want to exclude some things. So I'm going to click Add New. My first field, the sales type, here's all those same sales that we had in this option up top in the sales department. So again, if you needed something additional here, that's when you would go back to Master Fields Management and add those sales types. So your exclusions and your regular sales categories are within the same bucket, essentially. So let's say we needed to exclude I'll go with employee discounts here. Then your offset field, this is a certain dollar amount that you could deduct. So of my employee discount sales, I can exclude up to $5,000 of those. So a standard amount. Or you could do an offset percent. So I can exclude employee discount sales up to 100%. So fully exclude all of them. And then cap amount and cap percent. These are similar, but it's based off of the gross sales. So I could exclude my employee discounts up to $5,000 of the gross sales, or let's say I'll leave this to 100. So this is saying I could exclude 100% of my employee discounts up to 2% of my total gross sales. So you're giving it a cap, you're cutting it off. And then once you had those entered here, again, if you want to do more than just track it for informational purposes and you actually want to apply it to the calculations, just be sure to check that box. And then I'm going to delete ours just so we don't have to enter those sales. And then the last thing down here, you do have a notes box. So if you wanted to track any information about the scenario or what's going on with this lease, you have a nice big area to do that in. And then once you've got everything up to your standards here, then down in the bottom right corner is the Save button. Percent rent record was saved successfully. And I thought it would refresh, but maybe it already did it and I missed it. But it'll refresh your scenario and save everything that you just entered. Now again, that sounded like a lot because we went through each individual field, but you would do that same kind of setup for each of your leases. And then once you've set up this information, up across the top, we've got a couple hyperlinks here. So I'm going to click the first one, sales.
I think that these are all, looks like they're all fields that were in like our percentage rent template.
Mm-hmm.
Are we still going to have to enter all of it for each one, or will those be automatically entered?
No. So if you filled out the template, then those are automatically going to be created for you. But if you had any new leases moving forward or any changes, and that's when you would go into this screen.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's good. The import template will save you a lot of time.
I'm pretty positive though, the breakpoints are entered based on the billing cycle. So if the billing cycle is monthly, the breakpoint is a monthly number.
Gotcha.
I feel like we got a few different things that said to do it that way. But we can update those, I guess, in there, like once we are in the system and we can kind of see how it all looks once everything's entered. We'll be able to just go in there and edit that if we need to, right?
Yeah, they'll be available. They'll look just like this. You could go in, make whatever changes, and click update.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll make a note of that just so I can tell Heather so she's aware in case that were to come up later.
Okay.
I have one related question for the contacts for the sales reports. We also provided those contacts previously in an import template. Will those automatically link back, or do we need to individually link those as well?
So previously, did you do just standard like landlord payments, billing contacts, things like that, or did you include your actual percent rent ones in that as well?
We included the percent rent ones. I can't remember what we labeled them at this moment, but they were specific to the sales reports.
Okay, then you should be good with that too. Sorry, I didn't realize that. But yeah, those would already be attached to your leases. So kind of similar to what I was saying a second ago, you would really just need to go in there to make updates or add new ones.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you guys are way ahead of the game with all the imports. Nice. Okay, so I clicked the sales hyperlink and that took us into this page here. And this is just giving you insight to the sales that have been uploaded or imported for this particular lease and this particular scenario. Now this is going to default to your current cycle time frame here. So if you wanted to go back and see previous year's sales, then you could use these to adjust and then say apply filter. But this screen here, while you can add new sales here if you needed to, like you needed to make a one-off adjustment or something, you could come in and click add new and add that information. But typically on this screen, you're really just going to be viewing the sales or maybe making some small edits or maybe deleting something. But you'll be importing sales at a mass level on a different screen. So this one here is just kind of for insight and to look at it. But if you did need to add maybe a new row from time to time, just click add new in the top left. It's going to default to all the information we set up on the last screen. So our location, lease, the sales type, report type as well. And then all you have to enter is the period and the amount. So if we wanted to enter my June sales, I'd say 6 of 2020, and then enter my sales number and then come up and click save. But I'm going to import our sales, so I'm not going to save ours. All right, then we have the recaptures hyperlink. So if your lease says that you have the ability to recapture a certain charge, like whether it's CAM, insurance, tax, you can essentially deduct that from your percent rent payments. Here's where you would enter that in. Now on my lease within production, I had another charge set up so I could add this for you, but we will just make do here. But if you could recapture any charges, you'll click new. And the first thing it's going to ask you to do is select which charges that you're recapturing. So this will list any recurring charges you have on your lease. So I'm going to select base rent for now, but I won't save it. And then once you choose your charge or your charges, you have 3 ways of how you could enter this recapture. So do I want, or can I recapture a certain amount? So of my base rent, I can recapture $1,000 of it. Or can you recapture a certain percentage? So I could recapture 50% of that base rent amount. And then you also have a cap amount. So again, kind of putting that ceiling on it saying I could recapture no more than X number of dollars. And then the priority would be used if you had multiple charges that you could recapture. So here's where you're telling it what order you want it to take them out. So take out my CAM first and then insurance second. And if there's any left over, then take out the tax third. So you can kind of set the order of how you would want to recapture those charges. And then the cumulative column over here on the right, this is actually a checkbox if you click in there. But this is referring to do we want to recapture this charge at the very end of our cycle from that cumulative amount? If so, we'll check this box here. Or if it's unchecked, then it's going to deduct it, as you go in, as you're processing, as you're paying. So it's not going to be based off the cumulative amount. And then once you've got it all entered, you've got your save button in the top left corner, but I'm not going to save ours. And then to the right of that, you've got our payments hyperlink. And right now ours is blank because we haven't processed, we haven't made any payments or anything like that. But once you do go in and actually post, you're going to see any of your percent rent payments that you have paid within this pop-up here. So it'll tell you what period you paid them in, it'll give you your dates and your amount, and then it'll also show you the corresponding prior and current year end for that particular charge or invoice, if you want to think of it that way. All right, so any questions on any of that before we actually go into the module?
For, and I'm assuming you're going to go over I guess the sales upload.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of explain, so right now, we do have quite a few exclusions, but the way our reporting system works, it doesn't really kind of highlight all of those different charges. So we're going to have to kind of do a lot of different reporting kind of like on the back end. So we're going to have to we'll have all of those separate, I guess. So would you recommend that we do upload them and have the exclusions kind of all in their own, I guess, category, or should we just upload the final number?
I think that's really a matter of your preference. It could be your preference and also what the landlord would want to see. Because if the landlord wants to see it all broken out by category, you'd have to do it individually.
Yeah. Okay.
But if they don't really care about that, then it might be easier just to lump it all together.
Yeah, because right now we aren't taking out a lot of the exclusions just because we don't have the data to find those amounts easily. And so, okay, that's just something we so the upload is kind of the same. It just depends on how many different, let's say, columns we have for each store.
Mm-hmm. We're actually about to go into the upload in just a second. I'll show you. It's all defined based on this sales type here. So you would just enter it based on that sales type.
Okay.
Okay, so once you have created your scenario, I'm going to click close here. It's going to refresh our lease. And then now if we look in our recurring payments and receivables, we now have that second row there for our PCT charge. So I did not create that manually. The system did that. And that's really important to note because unless you are manually creating your percent rent payments, you never want to add this PCT charge yourself. You want to let the system handle that for you, because if you go in and you start playing around with this, it tends to throw things off and cause some issues. So if we open this up, I'll show you how it created it. It set it up as a one-time PCT charge. So that's the charge that we selected on our scenario. And the reason it set the frequency to one time is because really the frequency could vary depending on how my scenario is set up. Did I select bill when breakpoint reach set to yes? In which case I might pay monthly, I might pay at random, who knows? The frequency could be, based on my billing cycle, if I'm only going to pay one time at the end of my cycle. So it leaves it set to one time here. And then anytime you process within the percent rent module, if you owe, it's going to come down here and update this rental activity for you. And then that's what's going to generate your invoices within AP Manager. So you'll have a new row of rental activity here for each percent rent payment for this charge. So again, the system will set up all this information up top, and the system will always generate your rental activity underneath. But what you do want to come in and change is your expense section underneath, because you want to be sure to set your GL account and your remit to, so that way you're able to process these invoices within AP Manager. Because if these two fields are blank, then it's going to give you an exception and you won't be able to process. So select the appropriate GL account, whatever account you want this charge to hit once it, goes over to your ERP system. So I don't think I have one set up in here for percent rent in this database. So I'm just going to do cash. And then your remit to. So there I am. I'm going to choose my contact, a link to the lease, and then I can click update. All right, so you do want to be sure you do that prior to processing. So whenever your scenarios are created and your PCT charge is created in turn, just be sure to come populate those two. And then now finally, back here on our home screen, we can go to accounting and then percent rent. Now I see percent rent and percent rent enhanced because I'm logged in as the admin, but you'll only see percent rent here, so you don't have to choose. But that's going to take you into the percent rent module. So over here on the left, all these different links are the different pages and the different functionality within this module. And we're actually going to start at the bottom and work our way up to processing. So the first one here, sales import. Here is where you would come to import those sales. So we give you an example here of what your sales or import file should look like. So it should contain these fields in this format. And then we actually give you some sample files that you could download and fill out yourself. So I'm just going to do it here on the spot. I'll click Excel file, and it'll give me a sample Excel. So here's kind of the sample that it's given me to base everything off of. So all I need to do is fill out my lease code, sales type, effective and end date, and my amount to match my scenarios that I'm wanting to import the sales for. So the first thing I need to do is go back and see what my lease code was. So back here, my lease code was 001. So I'm going to enter that here. It's pretty close to what it already is. All right. Let me change the formatting here. Number. Actually, it'd probably just be easier to. Hey, Heather, I saw that you joined. In case you're wondering what all the chaos is about, production crashed on me, so I had to switch to UAT, and I'm having to do everything on the spot. Yeah, it was really great.
I came back to see how things are going.
It was a rocky start, but we made it.
When did production go down?
Like the moment you got off the call. I was so mad because I spent like an hour setting up all my data in there and couldn't even use it. But
oh no.
We made do.
I do have an issue with crashing production. I wasn't doing anything to do it this time. I was actually not even in production today.
What I'm hearing is it's your fault.
Yeah, I'll take the blame.
Okay, let me change my lease code here. So KM001. All right, now we had a semi-annual cycle and I want to enter everything at one time. So I'm going to drag this down for 6 rows roughly, and then go ahead and delete everything underneath that because I don't need it. All right, now if you were, oh darn, I wasn't smart about that. All right, now you're probably going to do this on a monthly basis. You'd have lease code 1 and its sales numbers, lease code 2 and its sales numbers, and so on and so forth. But we're doing our full semi-annual cycle at one time. And then our next column here is the sales type, and this is going to come straight from your scenario. So if you're entering gross sales, you can enter that here. If you're entering your exclusions, just be sure that this sales type matches. So just to go back real fast to our scenario, there it is. So you want to be sure that it matches exactly to what the name is within the system. So ours is called gross sales. That's what I want my file to say. So gross sales, I'm going to match that for all of them. Now, if you want to enter an effective and an end date, you can do that. Typically, what I like to do instead is I'll just enter a period instead of an effective and end date because it's half the amount of work. So instead what I'll do is delete the end date column, and then I'll just change the effective date to say period. I mean, you don't technically have to do that, but I do. And then I'm doing January through June of sales. So I'll say 1 of 2020. And it did change my formatting. So I want to highlight all of these and come up to my formatting here. And I want a custom format. I'm just going to take off the day piece of it and leave it as month, month, year, 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 year. Okay, so then I can make my adjustments all the way down. Oh, of course it did that. There we go. So now I have January through June, and I just had to enter one column of periods instead of both the effective and the end date. It really, I mean, both will get you the same result. It's just kind of your preference there. And then you can enter the amounts for each of your different sales. And I'm going to bump these up just a little so that hopefully we hit our breakpoint.
A little? That's a lot.
Yeah, we're making big money, Heather.
Woohoo!
I wanted to be sure to hit the breakpoint because might not. And then just to be on the safe side, I'm going to delete these extra sheets because sometimes the system can be a little peculiar when importing these. And once I've got it all set up, I'm just going to save it to, I'll save it to my desktop. Legacy, sales import. Okay. And so now we've got our file ready to import. So back here on this screen, since we've got that set up, in the import file field, I'm going to click browse and select that file that we just created. So desktop, legacy sales import, and it'll list it underneath. So if you did select multiple files at a time, it'll show you what you've selected here. And then underneath that, my file has periods. Now we did adjust our spreadsheet to only include periods instead of the effective and end date. So I want to be sure to check this box here. And then up above this, you want to be sure to choose the sales report type. So is this actual sales, certified, estimated, reported? You know, what type is it that you're currently importing? And we're going to do our actual sales. And then delete old sales report. If you have this checked, then it's going to delete any current sales that you have in the system for this lease, for these periods, and replace them with what you're importing now. If you don't have this checked, then it's just going to add to what's already there currently. So you're just adding on to what you already have. So if this were a case where, you know, maybe you imported your sales, but, you know, something's changed since then and your numbers have adjusted, then you could re-import your file with those new numbers and then say delete old sales report, so that way it replaces what you previously imported. So I don't have anything in there, so I'm just going to leave ours unselected. And then once you've got everything set here to your standards, you can click verify in the top left, and it will tell you either X number of records are ready to be imported, or if your file has any issues, it'll tell you there are X number of errors within your file, and it'll list underneath all the different exceptions or whatever those errors are. So it'll tell you exactly what row you had the problem on and what the issue is, so you know that you need to go back and fix it. But ours are ready to be imported. So I'm going to come up here and click the import button. And then it says 6 of 6 records imported successfully. So now, above sales import, if we go to sales entry, the screen should look pretty familiar because it's the exact same setup as what we saw when we chose our sales hyperlink from the scenario here. So this is just giving you another place to be able to view your sales from within the module, so that way you don't have to go back to each of your scenarios to look at it. So I could come in here and say, all right, I want to see that lease that we just did. So I actually don't remember what I called it, PRE training. There it is. And we want to, it's going to default to using the current period here for your filters. So if you want to go back and see, you know, 1/1 of 2020, then say apply filter. And there's all those sales that we just imported. So January through June of 2020 with all of our sales numbers. I did go a little excessive on the January period, but that's okay. And so from this screen here, if you needed to make any adjustments or you needed to add a new row or delete something, you can do all that same functionality here, just like you could have from the sales link that we went to a minute ago. So you just click in the field, make your adjustment, and click update at the top. And then down at the bottom, this one here does give you a running total, which the other screen did not. So again, just another place to be able to view those sales that you had imported or even added manually. All right, moving on up the list here. Next, we have the sales detail report. And you can use this to report on all your sales in the system, either imported or manually added, for your percent rent scenarios, and it'll break it down by lease for you. So up at the top, you have location and lease level filters. So if you only wanted to see your sales for a certain location or for a certain state, then you could set these kinds of filters here. Or you could just come down to the bottom and say, show me all sales between January and December, and then set your date range here and run the report. Now I'm just going to do our one lease, so that way we're not pulling tons and tons of information. So I selected my lease from the filters. Now the start and end period, you could look at one period at a time if you want, or since it's giving you the two options here, you could set a range. So show me all my sales for the quarter, or show me all my sales for the year. You can determine what you want to see here. So I'm just going to do ours based on that semi-annual cycle and click generate report. And then it's going to ask what report type I want. I'll just use PDF. Pop-up blocked. What you talking about? Try that again. There we go.
That's new.
Yeah, that's literally never happened to me. The weirdest things are happening today. I'm cursed. All right, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this better. All right, so here's our sales report by period, or the time range in which we entered on the last screen. It is going to give you a run date of when you ran the report at the top. And then each gray heading or gray row that you see here is representing a new lease. So for this particular lease, here's the sales department we're looking at. Here's all the periods in which I've imported and their amounts. It's giving me a total. And then it'll give you also a sales total and a grand total. So if we ran this for the entire portfolio instead of just this one lease, it'll give me the lease by lease breakdown and totals, and then my grand total at the end of the report. So this one here, or the sales detail report, is just give a list of your sales by lease. All right, then we've got the percent rent letter and percent rent letter without exclusions. So these are essentially the same thing. We'll start with the first one here. But the percent rent letter is going to show you your percent rent calculations for the time period in which you enter over here on the right. Now you're running this for an unposted period, meaning you want to come in and run this report prior to doing your processing. Because once you go in and process and you post, those current and prior year end fields on our scenario are going to update. And so we're no longer going to be able to run this report based on those prior periods. So again, run your percent rent letters prior to doing processing. And again, at the top, you could set your location or lease level filters, or you don't have to, just depends on what you want to run it for. But we are going to choose our trusty training lease. And then this is based on one period this time. So you're not doing the range like we did last time, it's just one period. So let's do 6 of 2020. And then these two fields here, the first and last name and the title, these are going to add, or this information here is going to be added to the signature at the bottom of this report. So I'll enter it just so you can see how that would look. Christina Miller, training guru. And I'll click generate report. Again, you'll choose either PDF, Excel, or CSV, whichever you prefer. No data qualified. Probably because I tried to run it for the last period. Let's do January of 2020.
It tells me that a lot.
It could also be that I'm in UAT.
Could
I
be.
don't know
Yeah.
if
I'm in
reports
prod
here
right
yet or
now.
not.
I know you're all the way through now, but
What the heck? But yeah, I asked them if they could access it, and they said they could, but mine wouldn't let me. Well, let me see if I can get in there right now. If so, then I could show you my percent rent letters in there. See, it just spins. It doesn't let me get there. I don't understand. I think it's just my computer.
That's weird.
Well, while I try to run these other ones, Heather, do you want to see if you could pull one up in another database just so we could show them what it looks like?
Sure.
Since mine apparently won't work in UIT. And while she does that, the percent rent letter without exclusions is essentially the exact same report. It's just slightly more condensed because it's not going to show that exclusion information. So kind of like what we were talking about earlier, if you do have lots of exclusions and your landlords want to see that breakdown, you'll probably do the percent rent letter versus the one without exclusions. But if they maybe don't care about that and they just want to see your gross or your net sales, then you could do the letter without exclusions. But hang
This
tight.
is going to pull up the letter that will then be sent to the landlord.
It could be that one, or you may choose to use the net sales landlord report, which we are about to run. And this one here, again, you want to run this one prior to processing as well. But this is going to be the one that shows your sales for the particular lease for the periods that you enter here. And it does give you the range. So you could show them, you know, the current period sales versus the current year sales. You can kind of define what you want to show them. But let me choose my lease again here. And I'm going to do my full range, 1 of 2020 to 6 of 2020. And I'll try the signature again this time, see if it works. Generate report, PDF. My life is just not
try
going
Excel, because I think I remember having this problem before. And if I ran it in a different, sorry.
I think it's just because we're in UAT and they recently fixed these reports in production, so they probably haven't been copied to UAT yet. Heather, if you go into the Academy in production, I know I have tons of leases in there that should pull percent rent letters and net sales landlords.
What's the number for them?
201423.
201423.
Thank you very much. I'll keep working on the others and hope I have better luck. Okay, so the next two, and I'll kind of reiterate these once she pulls them up and I can show you what they look like. But percent rent report by property and percent rent report by lease. Good news, these also give you similar information. It's just, would you prefer to see everything broken down by the property level or by the lease level? So if you maybe had a location that had, you know, multiple leases and each of those leases you're paying percent rent on, then maybe you would want to use the report by property one. So that way you see property one, all of its leases, all your percent rent amounts, and then it moves on to property two and so on and so forth. So same kind of report. Again, it's just a matter of how you would prefer for the data to be grouped. I'll just do the lease one right now since I'm only doing one lease. Or maybe I should try to not set filters and see if that works. And generate reports. So you're not actually entering any date ranges here. Try Excel. You're just selecting what leases or locations you would want to run it for. Hey, we might be in luck. Yay, it worked. Hold on. Here you go. Let me zoom out a little so maybe you can see it more condensed. All right, so this typically looks a little better in PDF, but apparently my computer is struggling today. Very sorry. But here's your percent rent detail report by lease. So again, each of these little gray rows is kind of breaking it down by lease. Or if you ran the one by location, then each gray row would represent a new location. But underneath it, it's going to show you all of your setup information. So this is pulling directly from this screen here. So all these fields that we filled out, it's populating it here for reference. So here's our prorate breakpoint no, bill when breakpoint reached yes. there's those interim report due fields that we were talking about. So even though they're informational, you can still see them on some of the reports like this one. And then moving down, you have a breakpoint section. So there's the 2 breakpoint rows that we entered, their percentages and their amounts. The offset section here, this would show your exclusions, which we didn't enter any, so that's why ours is blank. But any exclusions that you had would be listed here with their amounts. If we had entered any notes, those will be listed here too. And then it goes into our sales breakdown. So there's our 6 periods of sales with their numbers, and it gives me a running total. And then I don't have anything else included here, but if we had multiple leases or multiple locations that we, you know, if we hadn't set that filter on the one lease, then it would continue on and show all this information for any other lease or location. Any luck on the percent rent letter or net sales landlord, Heather?
Working on it.
Okay.
I forgot my password. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Reset it.
I'm going to try to do this without setting any filters and see if that works. And do Excel this time since it worked out last time for me.
I don't know why it does that in UAT, but I did have that problem before.
I don't know. I feel so bad that this happened, but it's out of my hands. All right, well, we will continue to wait for her and we'll circle back to those. But once you run your reports, and I did not say this before, but your percent rent letter or the net sales landlord, whichever you decide to go, or if you do both of them, once you run them and get that report, it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and save a copy of that report to your computer. Because like I mentioned a second ago, once you come in here and start processing and posting, those current and prior year fields are going to update. So if you wanted to come back in and run these reports, you're not going to be able to do it on that same time frame that you already used because you've already posted for those periods. So once you run your percent rent letter and your net sales landlords, you'll probably want to save those reports so you have them to go back and reference later.
With the percent rent report by lease that you just ran, I guess, would we run that to be checking for something, or like, I just want to make sure we know, like, what are we trying to do with all these reports before we get to process?
The percent rent report is really just more for insight to your different scenarios and your setups and things like that. That one, you're really more interested probably in the net sales and the percent rent letters and possibly your sales detail reports, because those are really what's going to give you the sales breakdowns, and those are the ones that you're going to be providing to the landlords. These here are probably more just for your reference to see, like, okay, here's our details around the scenario, here's our sales, and it's including kind of everything in one main page. And it's also giving you a variation of the report that you'll see when we process in a second. So these are really the only ones that are going to give you that calculation style report where it's showing you your sales, your exclusions, your recaptures, and any of that within one report.
Okay, but none of those show like what our percent rent due is yet, do they?
No, that's going to come when we process in just a second.
Okay.
Good question. So I'm going to go ahead, actually, I'll click process now that we've been through all of those. And so
would you like me to email those to you, or would you want me to?
Could you please? That would be great. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to join and save the day. Okay. So processing here, here's where you're coming in to, you know, I'm establishing my period in which I want to process for. You could set those location or lease level filters if you want. Or if you just want to kind of do a catch-all and say, I'm not going to set any filters up top, just process everything for the period of January 2020, or whichever one it is that you're on. But here's where it's going to look at all your setups, look at your sales numbers, and do those calculations to tell you what you actually owe. So I am going to set a filter so that way I don't process everything in this database. So I chose our training lease. I'm going to process for 6 of 2020. That's the end of our current cycle. Your invoice date, you don't have to enter this until we decide to update rent, so I'm going to hold off on that for right now. And then you can choose which report it is that you want to see. So do I want to see my percent rent report and include the sales detail, meaning it's going to show me my different period by period breakdown of all my sales numbers? Or would I rather see it with no sales detail and it's really just cut into the facts? You know, here's how much we owe for percent rent, and that's the end of the story. So I'll do it with sales details so you can see what that looks like included. And then update rent here. When you process for the first time, I would definitely recommend leaving update rent set to no, just to make sure that everything looks good, the math checks out, you know, you've imported all your sales correctly, and then you can come back and say update rent yes, because that is what's actually going to what we consider post the batch, which is what would update those percent rent recurring charges on your leases and generate that rental activity. So we're going to leave update rent to no for right now. Click generate report. And that's going to take us to the notification screen. So right now it's telling me I have one record or one transaction ready to process. But if we had some sort of issue with our lease or an issue with our scenario, it's going to be listed underneath here. And then it'll give me a notification as to what the problem is. So am I processing for the wrong period? Did I forget to enter sales for this lease? Am I missing some kind of information? It's going to list a notification here as to what the problem is, and then it'll actually be a hyperlink, so I can click that hyperlink and it'll take me to the place and where I need to correct that notification. Now, if I know that we just set a filter based on that one lease, but let's say we were trying to process everything in the system for 6 of 2020 right now. And I had one transaction ready to process, but I had a couple others listed down here that had notifications. I can continue and move forward with processing that one transaction that's ready to go. I don't have to wait until everything's been cleared of exceptions to continue. I can go ahead with what's available and then go back and fix these others later. So if a lease is listed here, it's just going to tell you, you know, there's some sort of issue you need to go back and fix. But we're going to click continue with billings. And then it's asking us what report type we want for PDF and hope that that works. And then open up what Heather just sent me. Did it? Yay! Okay, so let me zoom in here. So here's our percent rent calculation report. It's giving you all your information at the top, like our lease, our suite number, all of that. And then notice here, it says we're processing for 6 of 2020, and it says percent rent not processed. And that's because we set update rent to no. So what this is telling me is this is a temporary report and I haven't actually posted anything just yet. So then we can come down and start seeing our details. Here's the percent rent setup information for us to refer to. Then we've got our breakpoint information underneath, so that 5 and 7%, and it's showing me the breakdown of the calculations there. It's then showing me I owe percent rent of $84,000 and some change. Less prior billings, that's going to take out any base rent payments that I may have made within AP Manager or any PCT payments that I may have already made there manually and deduct those from the $84,000, but we didn't have any. So it says that we still owe $84,000 at this point. And then as we scroll down, it's going to list our recaptures here, which we didn't set any up, but if we did, it would have listed that charge type and whatever amount we could recapture. And then it would take that $84,000, subtract the recaptured amount, and then give us a new total here. And then keep going down, we've got our sales detail. So there's those 6 rows of different sales numbers. If we had our exclusion set up, it would list the offset amount or offset percent over here and give you a total for how much is to be excluded for each of those categories or each of those periods. Then again, we've got the breakpoints kind of stated more clearly here. The the exclusion setup information would be listed here had we set that up. And then at the bottom, it would give us another total. So this right here is really what we're looking for. For 6 of 2020, we owe $84,000 in percent rent. And so that looks good to me. I'm satisfied with that. So now I'm ready to go back and actually post this batch. So I can close out of this report here. And back here on this screen, I'll click cancel. And we're going to switch update rent to yes. And so now I can enter in my invoice date. And you want this to correspond with whichever period it is that you're processing. So if we just processed for June of 2020, I want my invoice to be for June of 2020. And you'll want to enter this for the first day of whatever period it is that you're processing. Because if I entered a different day, like let's say the 15th, it's going to prorate that invoice amount based on the number of days within the month. So I'll do 6/1/2020. Again, I'll leave my sales detail within the report. Update rent, yes. Generate report. Takes me back to the notification screen. I'm going to continue with billings. Click PDF. So now we have essentially posted that percent rent charge or percent rent batch. So here, this is the exact same report that we were looking at, except now at the top it says percent rent has processed. So that means we've officially done it. It's no longer temporary, but we still got our 84,000, still got all this other same information here. So that has not changed. And so this report here, once you've officially posted, is the one that you would probably want to download and save. So that way you could go back and refer to it later if you needed to. Now, let's say that, maybe I forgot to save this report. Then that's when, close this out. These percent rent report by property or by lease could come in handy because as you saw, those are pretty similar to what we're seeing here, minus a little bit of detail. But those are the closest thing that you could get to seeing, okay, what were my calculations for this particular period? But I do recommend downloading, saving these reports for your historical reference.
So for that one, when you go to do the second half of the year, would you enter in like, 7/20/20 to 12/20/20, or would you enter in the entire year?
It's dependent on your scenario setup. So let me go back real fast. All right. So for us, I have a semi-annual cycle and I have bill when breakpoint reached set to yes, which means when I start off with my next half year, I'm going to start processing with 7/20/20 because if I happen to hit that breakpoint, I want to go ahead and pay it. If I had bill when breakpoint reached set to no, then that means I only want to make payments based on this billing cycle here or at the end of my semi-annual or annual year. In which case I would wait and I would process for 12/20/20 at the end of the next semi-annual cycle.
Okay.
So an easier, less descriptive way to break that down is if bill when breakpoint reached is set to yes, then you could process for every single period in the cycle. If it's set to no, then you'll only be processing for your current year-end period.
Well, I guess, so if you have some that the billing cycle is semi-annual and then some are monthly, and you go to run it, do you run all of the monthlies together and then all the semi-annuals together?
Gotcha. So what you can do is you don't have to set any location or lease level filters here. You could just say, all right, I want to process everything for 6/20/20, generate report, and then it's only going to pull what's available to be run. So for those annuals that maybe aren't quite ready yet, they're going to be listed with notifications saying, please process for current year-end period or something like that. So then you would just continue with billings for the ones that are available.
Okay.
So it's only going to process or post for scenarios that are applicable at the current period that you've entered here.
So so you're saying in that example there, we would have a notification just because we don't owe anything yet?
Right, so let me take off this filter and see if I can get you an example. All right, so I'm gonna run everything for 6/20/20. Whoa, let me update rent, no.
I think I ran those other reports full out. So maybe one of them will, in those reports that I sent you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I did not set any filters, and that means out of all my leases in this database for the month of June of 2020, now keep in mind we just posted, I only have one lease and one scenario available. So everything else listed here has a notification or an exception, meaning I can't quite process for it yet. So I could continue with billings and pay the one that is ready and then hold off on the remaining ones. So like some of these examples, this one's missing some sales. This one we're processing for the wrong current year end period. So that's actually our lease that we just used, because now that we've posted, my current year end period has changed from 6 of 2020 to 12 of 2020. So it's not available yet for a few more months.
Okay.
So there's various exceptions here, but it's only going to pick up and process what's available based on the period that you entered.
Okay. Because I guess so we're going to enter sales for, for each month, and we would enter all of August sales for every store.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would want to see which stores do we owe % rent for August. So we would run it, for the period would be August, you run it just for all of them and just see what comes out.
That's probably what I would do, unless you wanted to break it down reporting wise for whatever reason. Like, I only want to see all of my North Carolina locations in this particular batch. I mean, that's the only reason really you would want to use a filter here. But if you didn't want to break it down that way for reporting purposes, I would just leave it wide open and enter 8 of 2020 here and process and see what you get. But I would be sure to, hold on. Yeah, that's fine. I would be sure to look through all of your notifications here just to be sure that you're not actually be included. So like if it did say that you were missing sales and you knew that you were supposed to have them for that particular lease, then you would want to go back and make sure that you entered that in. So maybe just run through the notifications to be sure that you're not missing out on anything, but that should pick up everything that you need for the month of August.
So that very last row there, the PCT Legacy 2, so basically if we haven't hit our break point, say it's like an annual break point and it's the first month, and so for that store we haven't hit it, it'll just have a I guess notification like that to where nothing's wrong with it, we just haven't hit the break point.
Right. And for this one, it really is misleading that it's listed here, because yes, it's a notification, but it's still going to let you process that and see that you owe $0 amount. It's just letting you know that you didn't actually hit that break point. So this isn't a problem. It's just kind of more informational.
Okay. Okay. Is that, I guess, how we'll be doing kind of, I guess, the verification, or like making sure all of the information we entered is right, I guess, to calculate correctly? Is this kind of how we'll do that?
By checking this report here?
Yeah, or I guess will we go through like a training or something to show how we should double check our information once it's uploaded?
Heather, do you typically recommend something specific for that? I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Just basically, like to make sure we like entered the calculations correctly and that the system is doing it the way we think it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
I guess how will we go over that, kind of how we will check what's uploaded? Does that make sense?
Just like to verify your sales that you've imported, or a calculation?
The calculation to verify what we uploaded, like as our, break even percentages, years and whatnot matches what we're doing now, like make sure we did it correctly. Like, will we, I guess, be able to maybe process like prior year?
You guys can add in the prior year information if you want to.
Because I think in our upload template, we kind of started everything with 2019.
Okay,
and
that's fine.
So, or I guess, and if this isn't the right way to do it, I'm just...
Normally people do add it because it usually builds, right? So usually we do suggest you enter in at least 1 year prior.
Okay. Especially
for testing, because your quarter or whatever might fall between November and January 1st, depending on what kind of, that is a very funky quarter.
Yeah. I bet we have it.
So I mean, if it did, then you'd have to have last year's sales, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can, that's why we do suggest that.
Okay.
And we can test it. Obviously, we're going to put it in UAT or the sandbox first, and then we can test some things in there before we put it into the production environment.
Okay.
Yep. But I think well, for sales entry, you can look, I don't know, what does the sales detail report give you again?
It would give the breakdown of the sales, but they could all, well, yeah, that would
How
probably
would you
be easier.
verify? Yeah, the detail report.
Yeah, I was gonna say either that or the sales entry here, but that might be a little harder because you can't
You have to
export.
do each one
Yeah, so probably the sales
individually.
detail report.
Yeah, that's where you could do a quick run through. And when you look at your percent rent letters, you can also see if everything is in there too before you send them out.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
Kind
Kind
of.
of.
Wanting to make sure that, or I guess kind of what the process is for testing the percentage rent, like once our data is in there to make sure it's calculating the way that we think it's going to.
Right. We would just test each month, pretty much like what she's doing here right now. We would
Okay.
have you guys go through and look and see if our numbers are your numbers, how far off we are.
Okay.
If it was a calculation error or a rounding error, AMT likes to round up.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was some kind of calculation like that, that's how we would test, is running through in UAT.
Okay.
Just like she's doing here.
Okay.
For each. I mean, you can do each individual one if you have, those wonky ones. We could do those separately, or we could do the whole last year together if you wanted to.
Okay. It's hard just because all of our lease years are a little bit different.
Yep. Or you could do every month and then see where it falls each month.
Yeah, I think if we could just do maybe like a few months, and then just see kind of how it compares to what we,
what you have calculated. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, and I mean, we can still, even going forward, we can do them parallel because that's something that like I do in-house, and so that's something we could continue to do going in the future, kind of future months also. Too.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, cool. Couple small things left to show you. So now that we've processed and posted that batch, if I come back here and refresh my setup, notice my prior year end and current year end period have automatically adjusted. So the system's going to continue to update those as you process. So now my prior year end, aka the last period in which I processed for, is 6 of 2020, which would make my current year end, or my next period, or the period at the end of my next cycle would be 12 of 2020. So the system automatically updates those as you process. And then also now if we come back here to our lease, to our percent rent charge and open that up. Now we have a new row of rental activity for the period of 6/2020, which is what we processed for. There's that $84,000 that it said we owed. So the system generated that rental activity amount for us. Remember, that's important. And it doing that is what would generate the PCT invoice within AP Manager. So now if I were to go back to AP Manager, I'm just going to open this in a new tab. And I search for our 000 PRE training lease. Lease 001 PRE. Then I'm going to go to the invoices to be processed tab, and we should see an invoice for 6 of 2020 for our PCT charge. So 6 of 2020, it's included with the base rent charge in this case because we left this field right here, separate invoice, set to no, which means it's lumping my percent rent amount into the same invoice as my base rent amount. Now, if you wanted to break them out so that your percent rent one has its own separate invoice and your base rent has its own separate invoice, then you could set separate invoice to yes, and then they would have whoops, they would have their own invoices here within AP. But if we open this invoice up, I'll just show you real fast. Scroll down here. There's our base rent, and we have a separate row for percent rent, our $5,000 base rent monthly amount, and then our $84,000 that we owe for June. So now we could just move forward with paying that invoice as we typically would within AP. Now, to show you Heather's reports that she so kindly ran for us. Thank you, Heather. This one here is the reminder. Here's where you would go for that percent rent letter versus percent rent letter without exclusions. Where is it? Here we go. So zoom out just a bit. So it's got your contacts information at the top, whoever's linked to your lease. You've got your information here as to your lease name, the address, and all of that. And then here's where you start seeing the breakdown. Now I'm assuming you only ran this for one period, Heather? Do you know? Okay.
Sorry. I lost my unmute button. I don't remember.
Did you run it for one of 2020, probably?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so let's say that we ran this for 6 of 2020 for our particular lease, then we would see that line by line breakdown of January through June in sales, and it would list each total here for the periods and then give us our totals underneath. So it'll give you your gross sales total, your offsets, and then subtract the two to give you the sales total.
Are there other ones? It says there's 4 pages, so I don't know. Did I? Oh, I just did it for January.
Yeah, they're all just one period, but that's okay. Hey,
sorry.
Did you enter that?
Yes.
Oh. Nice. So that's what the signature would look like, that information that I entered. So it would have your name and title, and then your company name here. Ours just says the Academy because that's the database we're in. But coming back up here to the top, it will show you your breakpoint information and your percentage there. It'll take out any recaptures or exclusions and then give you your total percent rent due at the bottom. So this is one that you may potentially send to your landlord, and it is definitely a report that you would want to run prior to processing and you want to save. And then our other one here is the net sales landlord. So this one here. Sorry.
That's a big one. Oh, no, it's not. I thought one of them had like 600 pages.
It
Which
could
one
be
was
the
that?
report by lease. I haven't opened that one yet.
Oh, okay.
But this is similar. Let me see if the other page has yeah, this one's better. All right, so we've got our contacts information at the top again, and the run date here. We've got our lease name and address and things. There's that period by period breakdown of our sales. So we'll see each period's total, and then it'll calculate the grand total underneath. And then there's the signature information with your name and title and all of that. So this one's a little bit more condensed, but it does give you the sales figures that you would need to provide to the landlord.
So I have, I guess, 2 questions. Are those reports just kind of canned reports, or do we have the option, or will we need to kind of edit that to look different for if we need it to?
So these right here that you're seeing within the module, those are standard canned reports. There's not really much that you can do with those. But
Okay.
if you go into reports and report builder, it has the net sales landlord and the 2% rent letters. So you could open those up and customize them if you needed to there.
Okay. And then is there a way that we would be able to automatically send those, like the net sales landlord, that one looks like kind of what we would need to send to every like landlord contact? Is there a way that we would do that in the system in this process?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that because I almost forgot to show you. So for that, you would go to reports and scheduling and distribution. And then here's where you can set up, how often do we want to send these reports? And it's where you can distinguish that we want to send it specific to those percent rent contacts that you set up. I don't have any current schedules here, so I'm going to click add new schedule. And the first thing it's going to ask me to do is choose which report I want to send out. And I'm just going to close out a few of these tabs. All right, so enter my name for the schedule, which is how it would be represented on the previous screen. So let's say net sales landlord. And then choose our report type. Now, this can seem like a bit of an overwhelming list, but it's set up really similar to Report Builder. So if you know that your percent rent reports fall under the accounting folder, then you can find it in this place. So let's go down and find the accounting section. There we go. Okay, so accounting, and now we need to find percent rent here. There's net sales landlord. So that's the report I want. You can choose what format you would like to send it in. So I'm going to do PDF and click next. Next. Okay, so you can choose if you want it to go out at a certain time, like 8 a.m., 10 a.m., whatever. And then you can choose if you want to send it out once, daily, weekly, monthly, or annually. Depending on whatever you choose here, your recurrence pattern options on the right are going to change. So for monthly, I could say I want to send it out the first, second, third Tuesday of every month or every other month. You know, you can set this accordingly. And then underneath is when you set the recurrence range. So when do I want these reports to start sending out to my landlords? And then do I want them to just keep going forever until I delete this schedule? Do I want it to end after a certain amount of occurrences? Or do I want to end it by a certain date, like maybe the end of the year or something? So you can set this accordingly. I'm going to do once and immediately here just so I can show you what that would look like when it sends out. And then click next, and you'll define who it is that you want to see. Okay, and then what's important here is at the top, you can segment your report by contact type, which is what I was talking about way back in the beginning about how you want to link those percent rent contacts to your lease. So if I choose segment.
You're breaking up here.
By contact type.
Okay, I'm sorry. What in the world? It's like this long pause.
I know, it feels like she's like recorded.
Like we call it max headroom-ish. Okay.
Am I still doing it?
No, you're good.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Did you miss like my whole explanation of this?
Yes.
Oh no, the whole thing?
No, we heard bits, but it was like drawn out. It was weird.
Yeah.
So you want me to go back?
Yeah.
I think if you're just at the contact type, I think we're good right there.
Okay.
Or at least I am.
I'm fine.
Okay, yeah.
I'm fine with whatever Kelly says.
Yeah, you're okay right there.
Okay, sorry. Let me click next. All I said here was that
Why is it doing it right when you were talking? It's like it knows you're talking about AMT.
I chose once and immediately. Is it still happening?
Only when you're talking about AMT.
It's okay. You can start right there. That's fine.
Okay. Well, my computer hates me today. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know what's happening. Okay, so you can define your contact type here.
Do you want, okay, so you can ask if you want the contact type from your lease, your location, or your space.
I'm gonna go lease.
Most of yours are gonna be lease. So then you can, and then you just select which one you want. You will probably add yours to be like landlord sales or landlord payment. Yeah. So you can go ahead and choose payment, landlord payment, Christina. Okay, so is your computer acting up? Okay. And
yes.
and then once, I don't know what's happening. Okay. Payment. Yep. And then, oh my goodness.
Good thing we're almost done.
Right? And then you'll choose how you want to distribute it via email.
Only option.
I was going to say, I don't think there's another option. You can create a new subject line if you'd like. It doesn't have to be what that says. Of course, yours would say either Kelly or Reagan, but and you can also personalize the whole box there too as well if you want.
Okay, so that way the email will just have what's in that box and then the report is the attachment.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And then you
So,
go. Yes, Reagan.
sorry, I was going to ask this. This distribution would go to every contact titled landlord payment, for example.
Yes.
Okay, because some of our landlords request reports quarterly or annually, not every month. So is there a way to segment those separately?
I think so. Christina?
No.
No? Did she say no?
I give up.
We'll have to record it for you separately and send it to you. How to do just so it's not all partially Heather and partially Christina.
Yes, I'm very sorry. I don't know what is happening, but
that was funny. Yeah, we can definitely send that to you guys. We'll do another video and set it so you can show
a redo.
And yeah, at least the distribution part. Can they send it to specific ones, or is it going to send to all of them?
It is going to send to all of them depending on what contact type they selected, but it's only going to give them their specific lease information. So if I'm linked to 3 different leases, I'm only going to get my sales reports to those 3 leases I'm linked to, not everything.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes. So all your landlords will not get all your information.
Yes, exactly. But as far as like you want yours quarterly and I want mine semi-annually, I don't know of a way to just to break that up using scheduling distribution unless they linked them as different types of contacts. Like I had percent rent contact quarterly, percent rent contact annually, so on and so forth. So then you could choose it here. Yeah, it's a little more work, but that's just
it would do it.
Yeah, it would do it.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right. I'm glad I was there for a couple of times for you.
Yes.
Thank goodness. I'm so thankful you joined.
I was just like, I'm going to see where they're at.
Thank you for joining. I am so
welcome.
sorry. I don't know what was going on today with AMT, with my internet, but I'm very sorry. And I will record the scheduling distribution separately so that way you have that to go
and
to
see, now
to.
you're speaking perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a mystery.
Maybe it's when you're trying to use AMT and talk. It doesn't like.
Yeah, that maybe you can't do that today.
The combo, it's just too much.
It really
powerful
training idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining. I'll send you the recording despite all the disaster.
Shenanigans.
Yeah, the shenanigans. But I'll send you that recording and then I'll try to record the scheduling and distribution and send that to you separately as well.
Okay. This was very helpful. Thank you, Christina.
All right. Thanks for joining.
Thank
yeah, have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.